So let's bring in now, without further ado, infectious disease epidemiologist from the CDC and the WHO, also a certified industrial hygienist specializing in transmission of infections in the workplace. It's Dr. Murray Cohen. And Dr. Cohen, welcome to the Mark Blazer Show. So glad you're coming on today. How are you, sir?
I'm doing very well, thank you, Mark, and I really appreciate the invitation to join you.
Absolutely. So I wanted to start with right off the bat. There are all over social media, it seems like over the weekend, if I got this little recording sent to me about how Advil elevates COVID symptoms and you should be taking Tylenol, if I got that sent to me once, I got it sent to me on direct message probably, and I'm not kidding, no less than 20 or 30 times over the weekend. Is there any validity that if you take Advil as opposed to Tylenol, that it literally could elevate any COVID symptoms that you might be having?
Absolutely 100%. And I can explain how that works without getting too geeky.
Okay.
Turns out that our body has on the surface of lung and many other cells a protein called the ACE2 enzyme. And part of what the ACE2 enzyme does for us is it tamps down inflammation. So anti-inflammatories, which ibuprofen is, Advil, and naproxen, naproxen, Celebrex, a number of others, those nonsteroidal anti-inflammatories increase the amount of ACE2 protein so that you reduce inflammation. However, you know those micrograph pictures of the virus that causes COVID-19 has all those little spikes sticking out on its surface?
Yeah.
Well, each of those spikes is a protein. On the end of each one is a receptor that's looking for a way to attach to cells of people to infect. And one of those receptors specifically attaches to ACE2 proteins in human lungs. So by taking those non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, you're actually increasing the ability of the virus to reproduce.
Wow, interesting. I got to be honest, you caught me off guard here. I didn't think I was going to hear that answer from you. But interesting nonetheless. Your thoughts on the blood transfusion from a survivor to somebody infected? In theory, would that actually help?
Oh yeah, it's not a brand new theory. It's been used in various circumstances for decades, maybe even 100 years. Most recently, it was used with the Ebola outbreak in West Africa. Right now, there's a study that's headquartered at Johns Hopkins University. I know there's a number of participating hospitals around the country, including the Mayo Clinic, specifically to take blood of survivors, those who have definitely had the infection, the COVID-19 infection, and have survived. And in that blood are some kind of antibodies. We don't know what they are yet, but there are antibodies that the patient developed in order to overcome the disease. So the theory is that if you can accumulate the blood plasma and get whatever those antibodies are, that they can go into a patient and also cure that patient. And as I said, with the Ebola outbreak in 2014-15 from West Africa, we had nothing. We had no drugs, just like we have now with COVID-19. And that was the only thing we had to try, and it worked. You might recall there were two Americans, a doctor and a nurse, who were flown over from Liberia in Africa to CDC or Emory, someplace in Atlanta. And that's exactly how they were treated, and they both recovered. So we're hopeful.
Joining me, Dr. Murray Cohen, retired infectious disease epidemiologist from the CDC and the WHO. Can you get reinfected after being initially infected and say, you get better, you come out of this and you're not hospitalized and all of that, but you did have the coronavirus? Can you get reinfected?
Well, the answer is we don't know, because we haven't seen enough of it yet to actually measure and determine. However, we're pretty confident that you cannot get reinfected just based on how these kind of viruses otherwise act. The antibodies that you form to overcome that particular infection should keep you from getting that exact infection again. Now, what we're worried about is that, kind of like influenza, it will be seasonal, that during the cold weather, when the disease cases are tamped down, the virus will figure out how to mutate itself and be slightly different enough to then come back and infect you, even though it's not the exact same virus. And that's what's making it so difficult to develop a vaccine. But right now, in terms of social isolation, for example, I certainly would recommend that, if you can get an antibody test and you are positive and you're not sick, then you can ease up on the social isolation. You're not going to get this virus.
After you recover, are you still contagious for a little while?
Yes, for a little while you are, because it's the same thing as asymptomatic. People who, before they get the infection, can still pass the virus. And this also is interesting. It's why we developed that 6 foot distance of social isolation. Turns out that the virus is very smart about replicating in the nasal cavity and in the oral cavity, particularly the throat and the cheeks for people. That's how it first starts to get into the body. So you can, while that viral replication is taking place, simply pass it by exhaling. We know that the amount of distance that, exhalant or even a cough or sneeze can travel as a droplet that could be infectious is only about 4 feet. So that's why we say 6 foot distance will keep you from getting it from anybody who might be around you breathing the virus. But yeah, you've got a little bit of time before you're sick and a little bit of time after you're sick that you will still be shedding virus.
Joining me is Dr. Murray Cohen, retired infectious disease epidemiologist from the CDC and the WHO. I also read, doctor, that you could gargle warm salt water, and could you, in essence, if because I read that it lives in the throat, kind of at first, if you gargle warm salt water, could you, in essence, flush it out by doing this?
Yes, you can, but you got to think about how that works. The warmth is good because it nurtures the tissue, which is being attacked by the virus itself. The salt works as an abrasive and scrapes out mucus or whatever else the virus is growing in or feeding on. But at the same time, salt as an abrasive is making the tissue a little bit unhealthy, making it more susceptible to being invaded. So if that's the approach you want to take, it's probably better to use a warm lemon water or lime water, or even a regular mouthwash.
So your thoughts on the hydroxychloroquine and the Z-Pack combo? We're hearing a lot about this. The president mentioning it in a couple of different press conferences. We're hearing it, a lot of different talk show hosts talking about it. There is some success. We saw about the guy in Florida who basically, I think it was a week ago Friday, he had basically said goodbye to his family, his friends, and by Monday, this guy is among the living and recovering. And what do you know about the success of this combo toward COVID-19? I mean, is it a real viable thing, or is this getting America or the people that hear about this, is this getting their hopes up?
Well, I wouldn't count on it yet because there's only a few trials that have been successful. I got to admit, it doesn't look like it should be successful. There's nothing about the pharmacology of that anti-parasite drug that would make you think it will work as an antiviral. There's plenty of other antivirals which are also being tried on a clinical trial basis that seem to be more promising. But on the other hand, there are cases where it has been effective. So right now, since we got nothing, I think it's a good idea that in this country we're trying everything that might work. And, praise the Lord for those people who are making themselves human guinea pigs to try these drugs.
How safe are you if you wear gloves and a mask in public? You see people walking around with that. Is it kind of a false hope for them, or is that something that really is actually working?
Oh, yeah, it does work. But think about what it's working against. Again, the way this virus is transmitted is someone who is infected breathes it out or coughs it out or sneezes it out, and the particles then can float in the air for a certain amount of time, so someone walking by or standing there could inhale them, or they can land on a surface and live for a certain amount of time, and someone that then touches that surface, if they then touch their eyes, nose, mouth, and the mucous membranes, they have given themselves an inoculation of that virus. So those are the methods. The gloves and mask are what we call barrier protection. It's a barrier between the wearer and those particular routes of transmission. So they are effective. I want to point out that masks like surgical masks are not like industrial respirators. They're not like N95 hospital respirators. They don't protect you from aerosolized virus. So it could be a little bit of a false sense of security, but that's really going to only be a problem in places where there's high concentrations of virus, such as in a hospital. So for running around on the street, it's a good idea.
And in closing, we got about 30 seconds or so. The warm, humid conditions, are they less conducive to the life and the spread of COVID-19? I actually read that and heard that.
Yes, they are. And it's just like influenza. That has to do really with the susceptibility of the human. And our susceptibility goes up in cold, dry air, just the lungs themselves. The ability of the virus to attack is very much increased. Our resistance is reduced. As soon as it gets warm and wet, our immune system gets more robust, our lung tissue gets more robust, and we can fight the virus off, so it tends to disappear.
Dr. Murray Cohen, retired infectious disease epidemiologist from the CDC and the WHO, also certified industrial hygienist specializing in transmission of infections in the workplace. Doctor, great to talk to you. Some information that is fascinating and a bit surprising, actually, at the same time, too. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Mark, and thanks for letting your listeners know about this important information.
Absolutely. Traffic and weather together.